All right. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Crossing the Streets. I'm here again with fellow magician Jen and the man himself, Gazzo.
Hello, everybody. How are
What's
you?
going on, guys?
How are you, Mark?
I'm doing great. How about you guys?
Good. How are you, Jen?
Good. Hanging out tonight.
I hung out all day with Jen. It was a great experience. Really good. We went to the library and stuff. And yeah, it was a great day.
Yeah.
You went to California the weekend, Mark, right?
Yes, I was in
How
California.
was your time in California?
It was fun. It was fun.
Yeah,
Under the
good.
sun, California. And you guys were in Texas too, right? Doing some shows over there?
We were. I stayed with Jen's family, and I had a really nice time with his mum. I woke up with me on top of his mum, and he went ballistic. I was just trying to find
I don't
my
know
Details,
what to say
details.
I was
about
just
that.
trying to find my
I
thimble.
don't know what to say about that.
Just lost my thimble.
I plead the fifth.
All right. So let's get started right over here. Today we're going to talk about, we'll start off by talking about teachers versus YouTube when you're learning the streets. What do you think the pros and cons are from learning from the internet?
Well, the thing is, learning from the internet is you're learning stuff that they had just bought. Unless you see like somebody like Tom Mullica,
Okay.
who was obviously one of the top comedy magicians to ever grace the stages, and but his magic wasn't the best magic, but his presentations were top notch.
Mm-hmm.
So when you learn off the internet, you're getting a style which is like, how can I explain it? Pure amateurish, to my opinion. They buy a trick and they put it on the internet, but they don't know why that trick particularly works, or what gives it the reason why they think people would want to see that trick. And I call it magic, which is flavor of the week.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't suggest anybody go on the internet. I would suggest people look at classic books. It's nice to see somebody on the internet performing.
Yeah,
But
like street performers. When you watch all the street performers around the world, and you,
Well, the thing is with watching a street performer, you never really get the understanding of it because you're not in the atmosphere. You need to be on the streets watching them so you can understand the atmosphere that the street performer is trying to create. I hate watching myself on the internet because it doesn't give true value of what I'm trying to do. But if you're in watching me on the streets in front of the crowd, you're in the audience, then you understand what it's all about.
Would you say that the kids from YouTube now and the younger generation, they have a higher learning curve? I mean, back then, magicians would have to learn from books or from gambling places or people that knew gambling moves. But now you see the younger generation, skateboarders, younger figure skaters, any artists, and their level is so much higher because they have so much more information to bring.
Well, a good example of that is that young Asian girl, Anna, I don't know her second name, but she's doing manipulations, and she's really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
She's probably learned by watching Dan and Dave Block,
Yeah.
on their YouTube channel on the internet, and she's sort of emulated their style. Or
Right.
I don't know much about her, but she's a young girl that I think has never really performed magic tricks early in her career. She just done flourishes, but there is room for that type of. It's not magic; it's skill. It's
Right.
it's a hard-earned skill, and they deserve to get recognition if they're doing stuff that I couldn't do, you couldn't do, and you couldn't do, or anybody else they couldn't do. So they have practiced their art. But how much of that can you watch?
Right.
But I watched Anna on I think it was Penn and Teller.
Mm-hmm.
She went on Fuller. She did a trick. I don't know if she fooled them, but it was kind of an interesting concept to what she did. But it was something I think she thought out in her head, how she could go on there and perform a trick.
Right.
But there's no substitute for performing magic tricks. There's nothing better than performing magic tricks. Being flourishy is one thing, and then knowing how to entertain with a magic trick. And I think she's a good example of somebody stepping back saying, okay, I'm on stage, I just drop one card and what I do is kind of over.
Yeah.
But if I do that little segment in my act, I mean, where could you book an act like Anna doing all those flourishy things, because
Right.
people would look at that for a few minutes and say, okay, next, we've seen it.
Well, and that's one of the big questions that we've talked about during this whole week on our trip to Texas was where do you book that kind of person in an act? Right.
You can put them in a showcase, like with other performers, and say, this person coming up now, this young girl who's phenomenal at manipulating cards, which she is, but you can't bill her as a card magician because it's not magic. It's just skillful flourishing, which it is. I mean, it's great, and there's other people out there like Dan and Dave, and then there's that guy that lives in Colorado. He's secretive. He's Devon. DeVoe. I mean, there's another guy. I think he set the trend for this new style of magic that people are getting off the internet.
Yeah.
You're not getting off going to a show or a dinner theater and seeing those type of acts. You're getting this by watching people on the internet, and it's intriguing, and people get hooked on it, and they start going, oh, well, that's interesting. I can practice that. But when I was a kid growing up, that didn't exist. All that stuff didn't exist because the chance of you seeing somebody doing all that flourishy stuff it was non-existent. There was nobody in the world doing it. Yeah. You hear about people doing it, and you heard of a few books of Edward G. Love, I think it was. He put up a card flourishes, one-handed cuts, and I learned all those things from the books, seeing the photographs. So I knew it was possible, and but to see it live, it just didn't exist. So when I heard about these guys doing all these flourishes and stuff, I mean, I'm fascinated like anybody, and it's great to watch, but only for a very, very short period of time. And where do you go from that? And to me, you can't go very far with it because people are uninterested in it. They're fascinated by it, they'll watch it, but would they pay to see it? Highly doubt it. I truly believe having an abundant amount of skill, showing off your skill, adds to the entertainment value of a performer. It's different when you're at a card table because, I've been doing a few flourishes at the card table at Texas Hold'em, and they don't want to play with me because they assume that I'm cheating because I can handle cards, and that's not what it's all about. Cheating and flourishy stuff at the poker table is a whole different art altogether. They don't go together, and they shouldn't go together. So I think many years ago is people wanted to be considered skillful with cards, and they just didn't know how to do it. A lot of them didn't know how to do it. Springing the cards from hand to hand, that's one of the ACME card flourishes that one wants to learn. Everyone wants to learn that, a novice or an amateur or a guy next door want to do a few card tricks. The first thing you come in when you start doing magic and you start doing the one-handed shuffle or some one-handed cuts, color changes, he says, can you spring cards hand to hand? Because they see that on the TV. So they're fascinated with that they associate that with your skill level. They assume that you can do those things because you're billed as a magician. When these new kids on the block are coming up from the internet, they're doing unbelievable flourishy stuff that I'm just fascinated.
And some of them are like 12 years old.
It's unbelievable. It's a different level, but I urge anybody out there, that's not enough. It's not enough. Yeah. Basically, I can put it like this. You can go into a gym and hit the speed bag, hit the mitts and the double-ended bag. You can look good on all those things, but when you go in a ring and you have to perform those techniques when someone's throwing punches at you, it's a whole different ball game. So what it is, I say to all these young kids coming up in the internet world, is all that flourishes, all that stuff, it doesn't hold water until you can perform with a deck of cards, entertain with them, jokes, timing, knowing what tricks to perform,
Yeah.
when to put the deck down, when to walk off stage. All these things you can't learn by watching people off the internet, and that's so it is changed the whole outlook on magic on the internet, but it makes me feel better about myself because I have less competition.
Right.
I have less chance to prove myself because, I mean, I can't do those flourishes. You know, I wish I could. I just don't have the attention span to learn to study that art.
I mean, the positive side of the flourishes is some of this is what gets the new generation into magic. You know, like it's giving them a kind of a bridge to go into magic. You know.
Well, I maybe, but I think what's getting people into magic is people like Shim Lin, who's won this big competition. He's a big star now, and he set a new trend. David Blaine, another one, he set a trend with people tuning in to see his specials or his documentaries, reading about Shim Lin and winning these competitions, and the show Flawless has got a new generation of magicians. And magic is bigger now than it's ever been, ever, as far as mainstream, you know, and it deserves its place in on a pedestal, you know, in the plateau of arts. It's because magic is an art, and we all know this. But like I said, I think I spoke about this. A juggler will have to come on stage and juggle 5 balls or 5 clubs. He has to put the work in. He has to really study and practice in his back garden how to juggle or ride a unicycle at the same time and juggle fire. And he has to really study the art of juggling. He has to go in and read all the books, watch people, and just stand there and practice. They practice over a bed so they don't have to keep picking up the balls.
Right.
So the balls land on the bed when they drop, so they can just pick them up. And it's tiring and exhilarating, and you know it spends a lot of energy for them. But magic, it's just you just make something disappear, and they think you're a god. But a juggler drops something, they'd say he's not very good.
Huh.
Even though they don't appreciate the time and energy he's put into his craft.
Right.
You know? So with juggling, you have to be good to excel in your craft. With magic, you don't have to be good. You just buy a self-bought trick, or you watch somebody do something on the internet.
Right.
It's got to be entertaining.
It's sad. It has to be entertaining. Yeah. There's no doubt about it.
So what do you think about, you know, on the internet, all the effects being exposed on YouTube? And
it's got no bearing in anything. I'll tell you why. Because I've been saying this for years. Everyone's give that mask magician Valentino crap for exposing it. But he made, you know, $100,000. I mean, it's not. I would never do anything like that. But he had to feed his family, and he decided to go to the dark side and do what he did. He sold out. Yeah. But he made probably $100,000-200,000 for doing it. He can't walk through many magic clubs or doors because he's hated. But if it wasn't him, it would have been somebody else. Yeah. And plus the fact some people are doing it all over the internet. Tune in here. How did Shim Lin do his latest tricks? And they're exposing it.
But do you think that by exposing those tricks like that, it made it better? It made people push
I don't think it made it better or more accessible. It's just people don't really care how the tricks are done. And if they do it, it doesn't bother me. It shouldn't bother anybody if they know that one of the linking rings has got a gap in it so you can link it to the others. But you never see that gap, do you? You never see the gap in that linking ring. So letting the lay public know how a trick is done. Basically, if you're going to change the carburetor or some technical part on a Ferrari, you show them on the internet. You say you take this spanner, or in America a wrench. You take a number 6 3mm, and you take this nut off. And then once you got that off, it exposes the flange or the cork seal. And then you take this off, and then you do this, and you clip this there. But you're watching that, and you can't go into your garage in half an hour and change that carburetor or pump on a Ferrari because you can't remember it. So by exposing magic on TV, and they say there's a little gap here, and if how they do the miser's dream is they have coins in their hand and they drop them in this hand and keep this one in the right hand as they pretend to drop it in the bucket. So at the moment they understand how it's done, but when they're watching that magician on the cruise ships do that trick, they can't think back to remember. How did they do that? I mean, I saw it, but so it doesn't hurt me. It shouldn't hurt anybody by exposing magic. People should really appreciate magic for the art that it is, and it's a wonderful art. Well, it was sad because there was a guy that come on AGT, the original, not AGT, but BGT, sorry, Britain's Got Talent, and he come out and he started to perform with the Lusander floating table, and he just got gonged, four gongs, I think four judges, so he got booed, punched out on each buzzer, and he stood there on stage and he was like in shock, like, what? Why did you buzz me? And the woman says, because we could see the wire. You could see the wire through the silk holding up your table. It was so bad. So, you know, rightly so. You can't just buy a store-bought trick and expect to go on stage of 3,000 people and national TV with millions of viewers and expect to do well with a store-bought trick. It doesn't matter how much it cost. And I think it was like $2,000 at the time when you purchased Lusander's table.
And he spent his whole life perfecting to perform that trick, you know.
I just went on, like I say, he didn't perform with it.
Right, but I'm saying Lusander, he spent most of his whole life perfecting that trick.
He's a professional.
Right.
It's different. This guy was an amateur and he come on stage and he got like reamed and they said, this is awful. We could see the wire. So what happened a few days after that, on all the for sale sites was Lusander's floating table, 50 cents. Lusander's floating table with case, you know, the Mark II version, you know, $1. It was obviously a gag, they weren't selling them, but it just took the mickey out of Lusander's floating table for a while. And it didn't stop his sales. He's still selling them because it's a fantastic illusion, right? But done properly, it's a fantastic illusion. This kid went on there and just ruined a really, really good trick.
Classic, yeah.
A classic, yes, a classic trick. And he ruined it, and he ruined it for everybody. But the difference is I would never go on and perform a trick like that. It's just not my style. I wouldn't, you know, without rehearsing any trick. I'm a big fan of the zombie. The classic zombie, and it's a wire. It's a ball on a piece of wire, right? But done properly, it's one of the most beautiful illusions in the world. Done properly, but if it's not done properly, you expose the wire, and the silk is laying on the wire as you lift it up. If it's not done properly, it's a bogus, amateurish trick. But these tricks are amateurish to me, like the floating table, the zombie. The linking rings, they're amateurish tricks for somebody that hasn't rehearsed with them, but they're unbelievable tricks in the hands of a professional. Wow. They're the best tricks in the world, the Lusander floating table, the zombie, the linking rings, and the floating rose with the thread. You get thread that is too thick and it's visible, they see the wire. So it's an amateurish trick, not the right lighting. So a professional will study the art of a floating object and realize that the thread he's using needs to be a little bit thinner than what he's been using because people have seen it. So he's been on stage doing it and people are whispering. You know when people see it because they don't shout out. They don't say, forfeit. I can see the wire going from the microphone to your buttonhole in your shirt. They don't say this, they whisper. So the performer on stage hears the whispers. So the first thing he does, he goes back to the green room or the drawing room, goes home and starts developing a thinner nylon or a thinner filament fishing line or a strip from a stocking that Fred Capps used to come up with, the originator of all this stuff. I believe it might have been somebody else, but I think that's who takes credit. They go home and do their homework. A professional will do their homework. An amateur would just go on stage without rehearsing, without realizing the lighting conditions, and just ruin it for everybody. It becomes an amateurish trick. Right. But you put it in the hands of a professional, it's the best trick in the world. Like all classics of magic, you know.
And so that brings us back to the subject of teachers versus YouTube. And I think, I mean, in my opinion, having a great teacher makes a big difference. You'll see all of some of the most amazing professional magicians like Michael Weber, Di Vernon, Losander, Gazzo. They all have these mentors or these teachers that helped bump them up to a new level. And like, how important do you think it is for people to seek out teachers if they're serious about it?
Well, I think having a mentor is a fantastic opportunity in magic, but a lot of people can't get to that. They have to pay through the nose for it. You know, there's schools in Las Vegas, there's schools in England, there's schools all over the world, but you have to pay. If you want to sit down with one Tamariz, for instance, you have to spend $2,000 a day to sit there and hear him think. I think it's worth every penny just to see the man. But I can go over and shake his hand, and he knows who I am, and I know who he is. I don't have to spend $2,000.
Right.
I don't want to learn from one. I learn from one, but just by being in his presence. But I'm not interested in taking a class from him because what he does, it wouldn't help me, I don't think. So I'm not willing to spend $2,000 to learn from him. But somebody else has that opportunity, that they should spend that money. Yeah. It's well worth it. Any good teacher is well worth it in magic, spending good money. But there are some teachers that just cannot teach. I'm interested in learning a particular trick right now, and he's one of my best friends, but he just can't teach for the toffee, for the life of it. He just cannot teach. He's not a very good teacher.
But he's a good performer.
But he's brilliant. He's fantastic. But I keep asking him the right questions. How did you, when you did this, when you did that, I'm fascinated with this trick, but
right.
And he just doesn't understand the art of teaching. Teaching is an art, just like in performing magic. And to get the right teacher, if you get an opportunity to train with some of the greats, you should spend the money. And it's worth every penny if you're learning something.
Yeah.
You know. But I meant there's a lot of, I think one-on-one is the best way to go when you're learning magic, one-on-one. I don't think you should go to a school of 30 people for a couple of hours and hearing the lecture and stuff like that, like they do lectures, and there's 30 magicians in a club or a school hall or a church where the lecturer would come in and they sit around hearing the lecture. That's valuable. Mm-hmm. And it's only like $10 to go and see one. But if it's somebody, and no names, no flaming, but if somebody there is to sit there and perform magic just to sell it without giving any information, it's not how magic should be taught. Because when I was a kid, you learnt magic by going to magic shops. There is no magic shops today. So unfortunately, you have to go on the internet. But so performing magic, like we said it before, performing magic through the internet can be a good thing or a bad thing. Today, it's a good thing because that's all there is, right? Books are becoming less prominent, and it's all downloads now. So I'm old school, but somebody like that girl Anna I mentioned earlier, she probably learned all the way through the internet, and she didn't enjoy joining a SAM or IBM magic club where you go there and you have to sit there and listen to all the politics and the treasurer's report and all but that's not what magic's about. Right. Kids want to learn magic. They go to these clubs and they don't learn magic. So when I show up to a lecture in, say, Boondocks, Utah, where is 60, 80 miles in the middle of nothing around, you go to a club and all you see is men. Very rarely you'll get a young boy who's 11, 12 years old in that club.
Retired.
All retired people. Where's all the kids? They're not going to they're not showing up for my lecture.
And most of them are not professional, so
they're just amateurs.
Right.
And these kids are going out their way to go join these clubs, and they're just not getting magic. It's all about magic. They want to learn magic. They don't want to hear some old man deciding who should do the library gig that he wants to give them
Wash
away.
the dishes after.
Wash the all this stuff. They need to learn magic, and they're not learning magic at the club, so they go into the internet. So in this aspect, going on the internet is a good thing, but for me, it's a bad thing. But I'm old school, so who am I to say? It's just my opinion. But there's a lot of good kids out there that are doing this stuff. You know,
I would say there's rarely any cons for getting a teacher, except you have to choose the right teacher. For instance, we were talking about a young man who's been running around for a magician, a well-known magician for a while, kind of being his errand boy, and he's really got stepped on over the years.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah, I know who you're talking about, and it's when you know there was a time with like Gary Darwin, for instance. He's passed now, so we can bring him up. He was a fantastic influence on a lot of people in this community in Las Vegas, and I told you when I was coming down the stairs, and he was down at the bottom of the stairs, and he used to scream and yell at me. It's all Knuckles, and he would perform in a trick, Knuckles, and people were coming down the elevator going to the baggage claim, would see this guy at the bottom of the steps performing magic, and he was doing it for me, but there was also people coming down staring at this man, and he was just a colourful character
doing
in this.
SpongeBob, right?
Just doing a SpongeBob vanish for people that are coming down the escalator. And I said that I remember every time I come to Vegas, he would always pick me up and I'd stay with Gary. And he was a fantastic human being. His whole life was centered around magic.
Wow.
All he wanted to talk about was magic. All he wanted to do was go out for dinner with friends, go out for lunch. He loved Chinese. He'd take you out for Chinese. And all he wanted to do was talk magic. And that's great.
Yeah.
He had a club that was not affiliated with any
That's still going.
And he was a good person to be involved with, and he was a good teacher too. So if you had the opportunity to train with him, it's too late now, he's gone, but there's not many people around like him. Johnny Thompson was another character in Las Vegas who was very knowledgeable, and he was very well involved in everything in the magic scene, and he had a lot of respect, and he was very generous with his teachings and his knowledge. He wouldn't charge anybody, but there are people now that would charge you a lot of money that, for a certain book to read. What book to read? I just tell them. But they say, if you want to learn what book to read, you have to subscribe to my channel, and I'll tell you.
Facts too.
Over
$5,000.
Yeah, that's. Don't get me going.
Well, that's it's a lot of good subjects there, and then also let's talk about some of the newer magic, this new modern magic coming out. We have like a flood of just new magic from distributors, from content creators, and there's just like I said, a flood of this new magic versus the classics, which are maybe a few effects, maybe if even less than that.
Well, it's easy. It's an easy subject to talk about. You see, you got people like Penguin and Murphy's. They need to survive. They have an internet-based company, and they need to sell products so the owners and the work staff can have a livable wage. So they need, and if they didn't sell magic, then they couldn't pay their work staff and run the business. I understand that. I understand that magic shops back in the day, like Hankley or Joe Stevens or Davenport's in England, they needed people to come in their shop and they needed to sell tricks. You can't keep selling sponge balls and egg bags and some Svengali decks or nudist decks. You can't survive on that.
Right.
You have to sell other stuff so you can draw a wage. So I understand the business side of it, but I don't know where I was going there. It was like I was going to go off on a subject, but the classic, you can't keep selling the classics to people because I only buy an egg bag. I wish I'd have bought 50 because Danny Tong is not making them anymore. He made the best products for as far as egg bags, and his wife Pauline that put them together. But you can't keep selling egg bags to professionals. You need other stuff. Professionals don't buy magic anyway. What they do is they go in and they just like to hang out inside the shop and talk to visiting magicians and the work staff in the magic shop, but they don't exist anymore. So, so the stuff that needs to be sold is the flavor of the week stuff that I am not interested in whatsoever.
Yeah.
You know, but the good thing about it is like somebody like over there in England, that's Andy Gladwin and Joshua Jay's company. See, Joshua Jay is a fantastic professional. He knows what works. Mm-hmm. But I could imagine that Andy and Joshua are sat down on the table, let's do this. And Joshua's probably saying things like, yeah, but it's they're not going to get anywhere with it. It's just we're selling it for the sake of it. And Andy's saying, yeah, but it's going to be a big seller. I don't know. Maybe that's the case it is the case with Penguin and Murphy's. They're just selling to anybody. Okay. And I'll give you an example. I had a residency in Boston called Baker's Bar, and it was the first non-smoking bar back in the 80s. It didn't exist as a non-smoking bar. It would never survive, but it survived, and it's still going now. And the owner was George Bakeman. He didn't want to be around cigarettes, and he had a printing shop upstairs, and he was printing law books. So we had a massive clientele of very wealthy lawyers that would support him. So any time George would invite people to lunch, he would order from this bakery in the North End, and they made these like chicken salad French baguettes with tomatoes on and olives on the side and a bag of crisps, Cape Cod crisps. And they used to come in there and really enjoy their lunch. And he's like, what am I doing? You know, when it comes to lunch, what I do, I get all my clients, and I'll order from the bakery and I'll put on a lunch for them. I just charge them, give them a bill, and they pay it. So he ended up building a restaurant below his printing shop, and it was called Baker's Bar. And I went in there one time, and it was a fantastic atmosphere because it was non-smoking. And being that it was non-smoking, you get all the entrepreneurs and the eccentric people around the Boston financial district in Massachusetts, and they would flood this place and go out for lunch. Then he ended up getting wait staff, and it became a really big deal. And I went in there, and George found out that I performed magic because one of the lawyers saw me because I was street performing in Faneuil Hall. So I would perform there every Tuesday for a couple of years, and it was great.
Yeah.
And I was a residency, and it was like then he had a back room in the back, and he would have like corporate parties, and I would get hired for that. So I had a regular gig, maybe three or 4 years. It was a long time, and I really enjoyed. I forget where I was going to go with this. I brought that up for a reason.
Well, because we're talking about new magic, versus classic.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And one of the great illusions that they were fascinated with the floating dollar bill. Oh. And back then I would be drinking, this is where I was going, yeah, glad you reminded me. But back then I was drinking Foster's in a bottle. It was an Australian beer, and it was a blue label, a dark label, and I could stick my thread to that bottle, walk around and put it on the bar, and there'd be people around me. I could step back from this. When it got tight, I feel it with my fingers. I'd get a dollar bill and float it, and people would be fascinated with it, and I'd just clean up by drinking my beer and put it down again, and I'd do it again. Wow. And people were just fascinated with this illusion. They really believed it was real magic. I used to laugh because when I first saw the floating cork, which was done on the Canadian magician, I forget his name. He had a special on TV, American TV. Before Copperfield, way before him and all the rest. It was
Henning?
Doug Henning, yeah. He performed the floating cork, which is put out by Fred Fred Capps, and it was Ace Place Magic that produced this pamphlet, and it was called the Fred Capps Floating Cork, and it went all over the world because at the time the floating cork was considered the greatest close-up trick that ever existed. There was nothing like it. So it was put out, but it should, in my opinion, should never ever have been put out. It was just too good, too strong. It was just too good. But then it became the norm. Everybody got hold of the thread. It was thread, you know. But when I see it, when I was a kid, I didn't know it was thread. I thought it was lasers or magnets. You don't think about thread, something so easy, right? So no one seeing that effect in a place like Baker's Bar in Boston would just mesmerized. They would just, their jaw would hit the floor. Word got about there's a magic shop called Hank Lee's in Lincoln Road in Boston, south end of Boston, South Street, Boston. A lot of the lawyers would go in there, hear about it, and say, we got this guy in the bar, and his name's Gazzo, and he does this floating dollar bill trick. And they go, yeah, you can buy it for $16.95. So they started selling all these lawyers that trick.
Wow.
So when I would go to Key West for the winter, I'd come back next summer, okay, and go to Baker's Bar, and all the lawyers were doing the floating dollar bill. And it was like, it's just destroyed. I didn't expose it. I didn't give it away. The magic shop did. Sold it to anybody coming in their venue. Anybody that come in their shop, they would sell, what do you want? They would sell it to anybody. But I think in the 1920s, 1930s, that didn't happen. Yeah. It was like, who do you know? Why are you here? Who brought you here? I'll sell you a sponge ball or a thumb tip or a nail rider, but I'm not selling you the floating cork, because who do you know? Mm-hmm. And today, you just buy anything. So the thing is with a thumb tip, I think the thumb tip is the greatest device that has ever been given out to the magic fraternity. Wow. It's the strongest piece of apparatus you can have, the thumb tip. But it's exposed. Everyone knows it. They call it the fake thumb. Mm-hmm. But you change a dollar bill with it into a 20, they don't know that you're using a fake thumb, as the lay people are concerned, you know? Yeah. As they say. But you put a cigarette in a scarf or a jacket with your fake thumb, they don't know it's a fake thumb. But you put a silk in your hand, they all right away they go, it's a fake thumb, because they associate the vanish of the silk with the fake thumb. But it could be a hank ball, couldn't it? You could turn it, put the silk into an egg, and you'd say, look, it's an egg. But where does silk go? Into his fake thumb. It went into the egg. We know that. But they associate the silk with the fake thumb. But used properly, a pro uses it properly, it will fool anybody that even knows that there's a fake thumb. We don't call it a fake thumb. We call it a TT, right? Thumb tip, a TT. We don't say fake thumb because that gives it away. So we call it TT. Or the plastic thumb bit, you know. Mm-hmm. But so it's the greatest, thumb trip's the greatest device in the world, isn't it? I mean, I still have fun with it today, yeah.
It's incredible. So we're talking about new magic versus classics. So what are a few classics that you can give to people listening that are good for the streets? Well,
we shouldn't base anything on the streets, although it's street related, what we're doing here. But I just, like I said earlier, street is a place to be bad and to practice magic, right? So that is what we're doing. Choice of tricks is what you're getting at. Choice of tricks.
Or at least a preview of things that people can take. Let's say if they're listening now and they're going to go to the streets later, oh, what did Gazzo say that I can try out on the streets, as a first-time street performer?
Yeah. Well, come restored rope. Let's start with that. It's one of the greatest tricks in the world, isn't it? I mean, done properly, it's just absolutely baffling.
Yeah.
Done properly. That's what you have to understand, that done properly. Having the knowledge of something and then the understanding, knowledge and understanding, that's what's all about, is having the understanding of why it works. I have the understanding because I've done it thousands and thousands of times. So I'm very skilled at understanding why tricks work, okay? So I have the knowledge, but also I have the understanding. Having the knowledge is knowing that if you cut a rope and you cut it in the right place and you put it back together, the knowledge of that trick is great, but the understanding is where you do it many times and then you start to understand why it's a great trick. Putting an egg in a little black bag and making it disappear, the knowledge is there. Everyone, you buy it and you have the knowledge, but the understanding of why it's a great trick, that's what you can't learn on the internet. That's what you can't learn from books. You have to be able to go on stage and perform these tricks so you have a full understanding of why they're classics.
And to me, that's, I mean, having a relationship with your magic, you know, that you understand. The more time you spend with it, the more you understand about it.
Well, because the more you do it, you know, most people have a deck of cards in their hand, okay? But again, it goes with this. Performing certain tricks at a magic convention is just not that I would never perform those tricks that you see at a convention. I don't care who the performer is. If they're the latest guy from South Korea or the greatest close-up guy from France or the greatest close-up guy from Cuba, they come on and they come to the convention. They're doing tricks that is appealing to a magician's audience. They sit there and they watch these tricks. But you can do some of these tricks in front of lay people, but only for a very, very short period of time. It's so these, no names, but these magicians or ABC magicians don't have a full understanding. They have the knowledge, but not the understanding of why tricks.
So these kind of magicians would be categorized as, let's say, flavor of the week, right? Let's tell our listeners, I mean, what your definition of flavor of the week is so that they know.
Okay. A good example of flavor of the week tricks or magicians that flavor of the week is every week Penguin are advertising, sending out an email saying this trick is unbelievable. Dan Harlan said this trick is the reason why magic is where it's at. And you go, oh, really? So people buy that. As soon as those emails come to me, I delete them. I'm not interested in reading anything about them because I have no interest whatsoever, right? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
But they would ask Johnny Thompson, say, Johnny, what do you think about this? And you know, could you give me a quote for it and all this? Johnny's a big name, so Johnny would give a quote on this trick, and they know by getting that person to
Promote.
not promote, but what's the word I'm looking for? Is
Endorse.
endorse. They endorse that trick, putting their name on it. So people going, oh, then it must be good, right?
Right.
That's not always the case, you know. So Penguin Murphys and other online companies need to sell these tricks, so they're giving you tricks that are flavor of the week.
Right.
Tricks that were like 10 years ago you don't hear about, but it was the biggest thing on the internet, and you don't hear about it no more. And a good example was that shirt one where you have the fake button and you use this device to switch things. But it come from a guy called Toke, who was a gambler, and he would play in the shirt, but he would sit back, you know, the big brother, and he would sit back like this, and he would have his cards in a Texas game, not Texas Hold'em, because they wouldn't let you take the cards off the table, but in a working man's club, he would put his cards here, and he would look around to see who's looking at him, but he's actually looking around to see who's watching him switch cards. But he's pretending to look at you because he didn't want you, and he would do this, you know, like this. But he's actually using that shirt as a device to switch cards. Yeah. So they would sell these tricks, and then, but like 15 years ago, you don't hear about them no more. It's the next trick that you hear about.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And you got a kid that spent thousands every year on all these tricks, and and they're just put back. So you can't blame people like Penguin and Hank Lee and these guys selling all these to these wannabe amateur weekend performers you can't blame them, but it doesn't. It's not hurting me.
Right.
And what I'm trying to say is, I stopped performing that floating dollar bill because they were doing it. I had other things that they could never do.
Yeah.
But it just sort of brought me down to a level and saying, step back and say, wait a minute, what's going on in this world of magic, you know? Because magic is about secrets. It's about secrets, and not many people keep secrets today. That's the sad part of it. It's all about secrets, and it should be all about secrets, you know.
Yeah.
But what was that question? Well, it's skill if you have a gimmick trick, you know, like, okay, for instance, okay, brainwave. Is it brainwave? Or invisible deck. Okay, right. Let's say invisible deck. It's a gimmick deck you buy for $15, $25, right? But it still takes skill to stand up. Bill Malone is a good example. Anything Bill Malone does is well honed and studied. And Doc Eason, another one, Eric Mead, they can perform these with these store-bought tricks, but it's the presentation side that they get credit for. Right. So although it takes hardly any skill to unwrap that deck of cards and say, look, one of the cards is reversed, right? You know the combination, it's every 13th, they count to 13, and you've got the spades on the bottom and hearts on top and all the reds on top, all the blacks on the bottom. So you just know where their card is basically, right? And you spread down and you say, look, it's... But that doesn't stand alone just by doing that trick in front of an audience. You have to do all the gags with it, all the jokes, and that's the skill side of it. But people don't understand the knowledge of that trick. They just buy it and perform it for their mates, and it goes in the drawer again. Right? You see what I mean? It's sad, but I mean, that particular trick, Invisible Deck, is one of the strongest card tricks in the world. But people say it can't be any good anymore because they don't sell it anymore. You see, magic shops will sell that trick to a guy coming in and say, got a 12-year-old boy. You want, oh, this is a trick you want. It's called the Invisible Deck. It's $15, but you get a booklet with it, and it's wonderful. And their photography deck as well. And you see Tom Franks performing that, and he sells a shitload of them because he's a pitchman, right? But they're the Invisible Deck, the Brainwave, and the photography deck, and the Svengali decks. I mean, they're the four of the greatest card tricks that's ever hit this planet, ever put in human hands. There's nothing stronger than them, right? There really isn't. How can you do that? How can you? They stand alone in the magic world. Those four tricks. And then you got the rising cards, right? And great trick as well. I mean, Iba Abahal used to perform for an hour with what you call the ash trick, you know. But they reinvented it and brought it up to modern standard. Not that it really needed reinventing, but cigarette and ash is sort of gone out the way now. So they really need to step up, and someone has stepped up. I mean, no doubt about it. It's very strong. You can perform with 2,000 people in the audience watching that cross on someone's hand. They don't probably see it, but they get the idea of the atmosphere on the stage, and the woman screaming, "Oh my God!" and the guy on his forehead or on his cheek or on his shoulder, on his neck, or they get the idea of that trick. So it's a strong trick. Yeah. I've never done it. I've never done anything like that in my life. But I think the original was a sugar cube, wasn't it? It went from the sugar cube, which then sugar cubes are not the norm. It's sugar packets, or a spoonful of sugar. But they used to have sugar cubes in the cafes, and they used to put your initials on the sugar cube. So when you put your letter B, it's reversed. So it's reversed on your thumb. But when you put it back there, it's the same as what's on the sugar cube. So it gets reversed and then reversed again.
Wow.
You see, that was the original. And they used to say, write your initials there with a 4B pencil, HB, or it was soft 4B, 6B pencil, and you write it there. I think they do it with the fountain pens, the old fountain pens. They would draw it on there.
Yeah.
They would take the sugar cube with their finger and thumb and drop it in the sugar, drop it in the tea or the coffee, stir it up. So you put that letter, your initials on that. Now you come over here. I want you to stand here, and they would press their thumb on the lady's hand, and say, you stand here now. It's dissolved, but look at that. Boom. And you say to this guy, you step back, you sit back a bit, and you come round here, and you start touching people. It's a very strong magic trick.
Wow.
It's a trick that everybody should have in their repertoire. I mean, it's so strong.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of it, but I've never performed it.
Right. It's incredible. And so the one effect, we were going to talk about one effect that's good for the beginning street performer to perform, you advised this week, was the rope.
I think that's a trick that everybody should start off with, come restored rope. But you can't build a crowd with that. That won't work on its own. It doesn't work on its own. You need to excel in cards. You need to perform to get the crowd to your liking, to your side, to a sizable crowd. You need to perform good with cards.
So what's the first effect? Someone can get a deck of cards and start learning right away.
The ambitious card.
Okay, yeah.
Because the ambitious card enables people to come in at any moment and at that time see the effect that's going on. A sign card gets put in the middle of the deck, and all of a sudden it's on top. It's a no-brainer. There's nothing to think about. It's simple in execution. Well, I wouldn't say it's simple in execution. It's simple to understand, the lay people to understand what's going on.
Right.
But in the magician's point of view, it needs like practice and timing, and but that's a trick I would recommend they start off with, is ambitious. But knowing ambitious, you have to learn palming, classic force, double lift, the classic shift. You have to learn all these sleights, So it's just not. It's not a store-bought trick.
So do you think that you can gauge a magician's skill by the way that they handle cards? I mean, is that right to say that?
Oh, that's unfair to say that.
Yeah.
I don't think you should ever put a magician on a pedestal because he's a good card handler. There's a lot of great card handlers out there, but you put them in front of an audience and their mouth goes dry.
Right.
And they start going like to pieces because they don't know how to perform
Right.
in front of the audience.
I mean, the opposite is said too, because we saw one of the biggest magicians in the world unfool us, and Penn and Teller go, here, shuffle these cards, and he couldn't really shuffle the cards at all.
No, he couldn't. No. Yeah, I mean, I've encountered many things like that, and I mention it. I mention it to the crowd.
Yeah.
There was a guy, I forget his name. I went to a lecture, and he was one of the biggest collectors of magic and posters and stuff. And he was like, every time I said something funny or I considered funny, they'd look at him to see if he was laughing. It's like, if he laughs, I laugh, because he's the big wig, So I thought he was the one I have to fool. So I said to him, take this deck and give it a shuffle. It's brand new. Open it. And he couldn't even open it. Couldn't open the seal. So he finally got the wrap, the seal off, which is understandable. A lot of he was probably in his 70s, this guy. But he was the biggest collector of magic, and he could not shuffle the cards with any form of grace or some form of skill. And he's probably been in magic in his entire life, and he's never done a card trick.
Right.
Oh.
To me, magic is the art of performing, it's apparatus to perform tricks with.
Yeah. Anytime I've been to a convention, when people ask you to shuffle the cards in a group, everyone immediately watches you to how you shuffle those cards to see what kind of skill you have,
Well, because they want to see if you handle cards with some form of grace.
Right.
I don't anymore, unfortunately, but I know the level I had when I was younger.
Well, you still can. I mean, I've seen you
Somewhat,
shuffle better than most of us.
I can't do the two-handed shuffle anymore because my left hand won't allow it to function properly. My brain don't let it go that way. So unfortunately, I can't handle the cards in some form of grace, what they consider grace.
So we're going to start taking questions soon, right? Maybe in some future episodes, we'll start taking questions from the audience.
Yeah. Yeah. Start doing like the live shows, maybe on Facebook or YouTube. Go live so they could ask Gazzo questions and you could
Yeah.
do a live Q and
I'd
A.
be happy to, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
I'm hoping that people out there are kind of fascinated with what I got to say. It's only my opinion, but I'm the world record holder for doing the most shows, which is this is supposed to be off. My ringer is supposed to be off.
We told you 10 times, Gazzo. Turn it on. It's okay.
Hello?
What has big?
The other thing I was gonna say is, I think when some people meet Gazzo, they could be a little bit intimidated because of his performing character of having fun.
That's not a character, Jin. That's me. That's
It
me
is
all
you.
over. I hate people.
I think the real Gazzo is a little bit softer and kinder, and he has a lot of fun when he goes out and performs. So I don't think people should be intimidated when they, have questions or want to know something. He's a really nice guy. Yeah.
Oh, you're bringing me tears to my cheeks. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, the thing is, I was fascinated with Ricky Jay. I met Ricky Jay once a long time ago at a convention, a collector's. I sat him down. He was with his entourage of David Mamet was there and his team, and he was going to lunch, and I went over to him and he said, "Gazzo, I would love to sit down with you, but we're off to lunch right now." I understood, he's busy, and I didn't take it personally. He went up to lunch, but I never really got to see him. But then he actually come up to me at another time hearing about a holdout that I had made by Martin that was for sale. And he wasn't convinced it was a Martin holdout because the straps that were on it were not authentic. And I told him the straps had been added. They weren't leather. Before they were leather, they were taken off because they rotted. And so I did get to sit down with him. And he told me once, he said he only answers questions to the right. He only answers to the right question. He won't answer unless you ask him the right question. You have to ask the right question. And I mean, I understand that, but there's a lot of kids out there that don't know how to ask a question,
Yeah.
So you have to have a little bit of time for everybody. The person that's got a lot of time for these type of things is Juan Tamariz. Juan Tamariz is fascinated with human in just humans in general. Oh, young or old, he's just fascinated with people. And he's come up in this world as, I said this before, I think Juan Tamariz and Teller are the greatest magicians on this planet. And they have been since they've been around for 50 years. Wow. They're the best two magicians on this planet. And one should listen to what Teller has to say, but you can't get a word in, can you?
And they're great people too.
Oh, yeah, wonderful. Teller's wonderful. I mean, Juan is wonderful. Yeah, Juan makes me laugh.
Yeah.
I said, Juan, I have a friend. I want him to train with you. I don't have time, Gazzo. I don't have time.
Well, I told you he's the only Juan.
Only one. Yeah, so go out your way if you can train with Juan or Teller.
Yeah.
Go out your way, find them, knock on their door. I used to. I go across the whole other side of the world to go meet somebody.
Oh yeah, and I mean that was the thing you used to say too. You used to say if Vernon was alive, you would ask you wonder how many people would actually fly in to come learn from him. Or
I said this 10 years ago. I was at a convention and I think it was FISM, and I said, guys, how many? Put your hands up with this. Honestly, if Vernon was alive or Slidini was alive, you would go and want to go visit him, or like to go knock on his door and sit down with him and find out what he's got to say. Everybody put their hand up. I said, well, Johnny Thompson's still alive. He lives in Vegas. He'd love to see you all. He's the only great that's living. Roy Walton is another great. He's still alive. He's in Glasgow, Scotland. And big pause, no reaction. It's just magicians can be somewhat like a bit senseless to me that nobody would go over and want to see what Johnny Thompson's got to say.
Yeah.
Anytime I would come to Vegas, I would always go visit Johnny all the time because he's the man. He's the guy that you need to get knowledge from and sit down with and buy him a soup, buy him a cup of coffee, have a breakfast with him because it's just a great guy.
Yeah.
You know, you need to go and do this with him. Unfortunately, Roy Walton won't go next door. He won't go and have he'd go home and have a cup of tea. He won't go to the pub. He won't ever go to lectures. He come to mine because someone grabbed him and kidnapped him and brought him over to me. But he's one of those, he's a recluse. Johnny was not a recluse. Johnny was very outgoing person, and he's like Gary Darwin. He was at an age, all he wanted to do was talk about magic.
Wow.
You know, and his knowledge was absolutely fascinating, Johnny's knowledge. You know.
Well, we're really lucky to have you because, I mean, one of the greatest magicians in the world here, Gazzo, and we're doing this new talk show with him. It's incredible. I think everyone's really lucky. And then, I don't know if we talked about this or not, but we should. And speaking of teachers, your teacher was Walter Scott, one of, the best cardmen known in the world. A lot of people, I think they don't know what you did learn from him and what you didn't learn from him. Can you tell people what you took away from the experience being with him?
Well, that's another hour and a half of talking about Walter Scott. We should save that for another podcast because that's a fascinating story.
Yeah.
And I'd be happy to spread that story. Because we've gone an hour now, right? Mm-hmm. So we're just at an hour now. I mean, Mark over here has been very quiet. He's been listening. I think he's tired from California, or he's married. He's got kids, and he's just exhausted. I mean, like going home, babysitting your kids, going out doing magic, then you have to go home and have sex with your wife. What family life? I mean, you have to have time to read books and do this podcast. I feel bad for you, Mark. But Filipinos don't have sex anyway, do they? So, yeah, I mean, Mark's been very tired, but he's the guy that's putting this podcast together. It's all his equipment's here, and this is again new. We're new at this, so if there's anybody out there that are interested in what I've got to say, just we'll put it up, we'll piece it together. I think we're going to close this now. We've been going for an hour, and I want some pizza.
Well, Gazzo's so old, he's never seen a microphone before.
I have. I used to work with them in comedy clubs and stuff, but I mentioned that to you today, that a lot of people don't know how to use a microphone when they're on stage. It's an important thing. So if you want to pursue this art of magic, buy a microphone, clip it into a little amp, and start performing with it. And when you step away, to ask the lady on your left or the guy on your right to pick a card, and you turn to the lady on the left, you stand a little bit closer, and you stand there, and you hold your hand out like this. You start moving away from the microphone, and the audience is starting to miss what you're saying. It becomes like, yeah, and these are all important things about performing in general, all these things about if you go on a cruise ship, you have a band, you have a cruise director. Do you ignore the band? Do you ignore the cruise director? No. You want to incorporate the band in your act. You want to incorporate the cruise director because he's the one that decides if you come back or not. So if he takes a liking to you, so work on routines that include the cruise director or the band, one of the band members. I had a lot of comedy bits with these people because it's their environment. They determine whether you're good or not by these things. Do you move away from the microphone? If the guy that books the comedy acts, you were great, but you didn't talk into the microphone. This is all stuff that's learnt in the art of magic. So, a lot of them say, "Well, I just use a clip-on headphone," but a lot of the sound guys on cruise ships don't like them because they feed back and they can't monitor them. So you have to have. You have to have your stuff ready so you look professional, But when you watch a professional entertainer like Michael Finney, for instance, he understands like sight lines. You know, he understands where to stand in on the stage. Does he want the curtains closed, or does he want the backdrop down? These things, he understands this. You see what I mean? Because he's done it a lot. Where you going on stage right away, do you want the curtains open? You know, and all of a sudden it's like 57 feet behind you, and you're not filling the stage. But if you close the curtains, you can fill the stage, right? You can play with the front row of the audience. Do you have spot lamp? Do you want the first 3 rows lit up, or do you want the whole house lights on? The house lights on, people feel uncomfortable with them. All these things are incorporated in your routines when you're starting to perform your career as a comedy magician, stand-up magician. So you should study people like Michael Finney or Mason Jonathan, Mason Jonathan didn't care, you know, he just...
Well, I think that's like I mean, you learn that over the years, but that's also the role of a director. Like Bob Fitch had a whole essay or article on directing. And I mean, whenever we go see a show, one of the greatest things I like to review with you is your directing. And let's say if Shin Lim hired you as a director, I mean, you would put things a lot more differently in a show. We talked about for little things like the red and black Sharpie, black Sharpie on a red card, you know, red Sharpie on a black card, even little things like that.
Well, because it's the idea of performing magic is so the audience start to enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And if you say this card has been signed and they can't see the signature, then they don't enjoy it, do they?
Right.
You made that mistake, Jen, about your drawing a farm animal, a routine. They couldn't see the drawings. You were using pencils.
Oh, that wasn't me. That was another performer.
Oh, was it? Oh, yeah. So a good example of that, your work has to project. And that is my experience. I've been doing it so long. I tend not to try and make mistakes. Mm. And if I do make mistakes, it's because of my own merit. It was my own fault. And it's just, you just need to try a little bit harder, everybody, you know. Transitions is important when you're performing magic. So, but where do you go? Where can you perform these tricks? Where's your venue? And that is where we go back to crossing the streets. The streets, you can, place to be bad, right? So we go full circle. So let's close this off now. Get some pizza.
Crossing the streets, ladies and gentlemen.
See you guys next week.
Yeah, I look forward to it, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thanks for it, Jen. Thanks for your equipment, Mark.
Thank you guys.
Go home to your wife, Mark.